Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Off Air podcast with me, Joseph Parkhouse. And joining me today, of course, are channel regulars Sean Skir. Good evening, Sean.
Hey, love.
And good evening, Nigel. How are you?
Good evening. Fine, thank you very much.
Excellent. So, of course, as by the title of this podcast, you can tell why we are all here today. It is going to be the last podcast of the season, looking back at this season's National League campaign across the division. Sean takes a quick look over his shoulder, perhaps in reflection of some of the predictions we made at the start of the season in one of our first podcasts on this channel. And again, as per the Maidstone United podcast, if you did watch that about a week ago, it's not gone too well. For all of us, some of us have done well in certain areas, but we'll get into that in a little while. So if you're unfamiliar of what happens on this podcast, there's plenty more on the channel to refresh your memory or introduce yourself. Feel free to go back and watch the early season predictions as well, see how those turned out, but we will be updating you on those in this one anyway. So the first thing we're going to start off talking about is the season in general, and we're going to go straight into it with the title race. Of course, the big ticket item from this season's campaign for many fans, and really what has generated a lot more attention around the National League. Of course, Wrexham got in their Hollywood owners in Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds. So obviously a lot more media attention is focused on the National League as a whole, which many would argue has been very, very beneficial to a lot of clubs. Obviously now you've got BT Sports and TNT Sports, as they're going to be called from next season, actively looking to promote the National League, and long may that continue. But talking about this title race, Sean, obviously at the start of the season, it was very, very tight on who was going to win. Obviously, it was a bit of a three-leg race at the start of things. Chesterfield, Notts, Wrexham. Many people couldn't split them. We couldn't split them, which we'll get into a little bit later on in this podcast. But do you think this is the best National League title race ever? Two teams, both over 100 points, and obviously Notts have got through in the playoffs, but I mean, what a race it was up until the end.
Exactly, Joe. And that in itself, the 2 points totals, both sides eclipsing the highest ever total in the top tier of non-league football ever. So they are the best two teams to have ever had a season in the fifth tier of English football. And a lot of people will say, yes, they are massively overfunded for this level. There's three divisions. There's the top two, there's everybody else, and then the also rans in the bottom half, bottom third of the division. And regardless of whether you're a fan of the funds that they've received and that they've managed to pertain in any fashion, as we know from Fred's documentary, for example, one benefit is the expansion of the appreciation of this division through that title race that will be talked about for a long time to come. I saw about 10, 12 days ago, Vanarama National League announced that Segi.tv is getting the North American TV rights for the National League for the next year or two. So they will literally use BT Sport, or as you rightly said, TNT Sports coverage. They will utilize that and share that on their streaming service from next season. So the overall outlook for non-league football, with what we've had when COVID struck and how bad that was, to now having this the possibility to stream a lot more of the football with the service that launched before Christmas, and the fact that Wrexham and Notts County have both gone, but there's still going to be a North America TV rights for the division that we, Maidstone, are about to leave. So I think that is one key demographic, one key way of looking at how the title race really had affected things. But yeah, just the stats, the scoring, the players. I think Wrexham won 22 out of 23 at home and only drew the one. The fact that Notts County kept knocking on the door against them the whole entire season long. I don't think it was much of a difference from memory of it all. It's pretty much always those two in the top two positions. I know Chesterfield were there fairly early on for the first 10 or so games, but Chesterfield, as we know, dropped away, which obviously we'll get to, Nigel, as Joe's already said. But yeah, it was just neck and neck for most of the season. You know, the odd point here, the odd point there, get to the 30 game stage. And Wrexham always had these couple of games in hand because of the FA Cup run that they went on when they ultimately lost away at Sheffield United. With about 5 or 6 games to go, you know, they were both on 97 points. Wrexham still had those 2 games in hand. And we've always said on this channel that a lot of the time you would much prefer to have the points on the board than having to play catch up with all those games. Having said that, when you've got a squad as large as Wrexham's and the absolute monster form that you're in, clearly, you know, you don't want the games in hand when you're down the bottom because, as we've already said, you're going to be in bad form and you're going to keep losing those games. But when you're at the top and you've got some good momentum behind you, you'd want games every other day. You want to keep playing them, keep knocking them out of the park. And Wrexham, to their credit, with all the challenges they had, you know, certainly the coronation that they thought they were going to have and went 1-0 down against Boreham Wood could have crumbled. But yeah, the head-to-head match they had on Easter Monday was just one for the ages, was a really proper ding-dong battle, just end-to-end stuff going for it. And not for the first or last time this season, a Notts County player missing a penalty at a very crucial stage. But as we've already discussed at the top there, didn't ultimately cost them. But yeah, just absolutely enthralling. You know, Magpies in black and white, missing out, but still achieving success. I'll take that this season.
I think this league, like you say, Sean, is many years down the line. I mean, there's no doubt Wrexham are going to continue to kick on, continue to build. They're going to get that support from around the world, no matter what division they're in, which, you know, at the level they're at currently makes their potential limitless. Because if you go into League Two or League One with worldwide support, you're going to have funding beyond greater reaches of other leagues, and that's going to carry them a lot. But at the end of the day, the story begun with this season, really. Obviously, they had the heartbreak of last year, but, you know, we've had National League TV come in this year. We've had, you know, that just to cater really for these foreign audiences so interested in how Wrexham and Notts were fighting things out and looking at things going forward. National League TV is obviously something they're looking at trying to retain for next season and maybe even dropping that down following Maidstone, not necessarily Maidstone, but into the National South and surrounding league as well. So, Nigel, when it comes to the popularity of the league, do you think this will necessarily benefit other teams? Obviously, National League TV provides an option for people to get into this level of football, but do you think smaller sides will benefit from that? You know, we've just seen Oxford and Kidderminster Harriers both promoted today through the playoffs in their respective leagues, but do you think that growing popularity is going to help teams like that out in the future?
Yeah, I think it will. I think, you know, once you shine that light onto a league, you open people up to, you know, seeing that it's not a pub league. It's not sort of like, you know, you got to remember as well that Wrexham and Notts County, they're two names, aren't they? It's not like Sutton United, and no disrespect to Sutton United, and, you know, Salford's fighting out at the top, but, you know, obviously they've got their backing and they're well managed over the years, but instantly you've got that Notts County founder members of the Football League, you know, and Wrexham, you know, they're the oldest international stadium in the world. You know, they've got that history behind them, you know, and they've got the whole town behind them, you know. I know Nottingham Forest are in Nottingham as well, but, you know, you've got that die-hard support that's been there through the generations with Notts County and Wrexham. So, you know, already they were sort of like big fish in a small pond, weren't they? And I mean, I think you've got to give credit to Notts County because, you know, you're saying it's the best ever, but it just because of the fast start they made, it kind of forced Wrexham to try and keep up with them, didn't it? You know, when we look at last season, you know, Stockport County and another big team and Wrexham, but Stockport County started off very slowly, and it's not until they changed their manager sort of quarter of the way through the season and brought Chandler in. They was outside the playoff places. But they, it kind of gives Wrexham that false sense of security when at the top of the league, but it's easy for them. And, you just take your foot off the gas that little bit and all of a sudden Stockport had games in hand and they just overtook them and ultimately won the league. But I think it's a credit to the league that you've got two big clubs there, fighting it out. And, Wrexham have done it, the modern way with social media, and getting Ben Foster in towards the end of the season. There was a lot of criticism of it at the time, but it's worked for him. All them followers that he's got on his channel and his podcast. It's just took it to another level, and I think it's sort of kind of like the genie's out of the bottle now, isn't it? You can't put it back in again. So hopefully the powers that be of the National League look at it, do it the right way, so that it benefits all the clubs, not just the ones at the top table, and you're not feeding on crumbs. If the wealth is filtered down evenly, then it can only be a good thing, can't it? We already said about the National League, probably going down to the next level, and even at our level now, you're going to have teams like Yeovil and Torquay next year that we're going to be playing. So when them teams meet each other, the spotlight's going to be on the National League itself, because again, they're name clubs. They're got a good following behind them, and Yeovil in the football the Championship less than 10 years ago. Same as Scunthorpe in the North now. These teams, as the others go up, what comes down, it's all relevant, isn't it? So, hopefully, they don't sort of try and grab all the money as has done in the past, the board of directors, and they try and evenly so that it's benefit for all the clubs.
Yeah, I think it's really important, as Sean mentioned earlier with Fred's documentary and the points you've just made there, Nigel, that the powers that be obviously dictate a lot of what goes on in this league and surrounding leagues too. But at the end of the day, it's them that will ultimately decide how this sort of wealth is spread out and who gets to benefit from it. And I do think that, what you said there, and if it's evenly distributed and it does trickle down, because obviously Wrexham are still going to have people looking at League Two, and then that wealth will trickle down into the National League and players will strengthen. Once the league strengthens in League Two, there's going to be players there dropping out, and they're going to drop to the National League and they're going to drop to the South. And again, that will only strengthen surrounding leagues. So hopefully they kind of, fix up a little bit. They kind of pay attention to what fans and supporters need in terms of that financial support, because there's a lot of clubs, as we've seen this season, the National League really struggling financially. A lot, of course, has come off the back of COVID, but we've seen Yeovil, who have, luckily for them, just been bought out. But we've also seen the likes of Southend and Scunthorpe really struggle in this season, Oldham as well at times with the finance. So yeah, it does need to be a little bit more equally supported, I think, just to help everybody out. But again, back to the title, ignoring the finance side of things, we're here to talk about the football more importantly. It really has been a great season. It really has. I think everybody will say that. The playoffs as well have been absolutely sensational. Playoff final was outstanding. As Sean alluded to earlier, Notts getting their success in the end, if not winning the title, a really hard fought playoff final. And what a game that was. I mean, it couldn't have been any closer, going down to penalties. Young kid Archie Mayer, who Maidstone fans will know has at times not been up to the standard perhaps of the rest of the Notts County team, saving the day and saving the penalties more specifically. But yeah, looking at that title race, obviously went really well, but obviously where Maidstone fans have been more involved this season was right down the bottom of the table and relegation. And of course, the relegation scrap was something that really had about 7 or 8 teams left in it with just a few weeks to go. Obviously, you've got the likes of Dorking and York were both getting roped into that towards the end of the season, and they both managed to find a little bit of form towards the end just to secure safety. But Sean, looking at relegation, obviously that's something that many teams have dabbled with this season, and something we'll talk about with our predictions later on. A lot of people overdid themselves this season, really outperformed where a lot of people thought they were going to be, but a lot of teams, Yeovil, Torquay, Scunthorpe slipping down. I mean, that's back-to-back relegations now for Scunthorpe. You know, it's as big as the promotion in some aspects because, as Nigel said, you're getting these massive clubs dropping down into what is now the sixth tier of English football. How do you think that's going to affect surrounding leagues? Do you think that's going to have a big impact having those teams involved?
Yeah, as Nigel said, it will certainly help draw some focus from your National League TV, potentially even, BT Sport, dare I say it, might finally start to cover North and South in a bit more depth, try and make their highlights programs into an hour long, perchance, even if it's just a minute of the highlights from each game in North and South and not much punditry on it. I think there would be an appreciation of those leagues existing on the telly box, frankly. That would be good. But yeah, a lot more focus being drawn. The name change to TNT Sports, the new branding from the new parent company. It'll be interesting to see how much exactly gets exposed. But in terms of how Scunthorpe and Yeovil are going to cope next year, it's always very interesting with the relegations. You see with Southampton yesterday getting relegated. They were in the Championship a decade ago. They had their promotion. They did back to back from League One to the Premiership, very much like Norwich did as well. Southampton obviously stayed where they did. You've seen the likes of Forest take 20 plus years to get back to the Premiership. Leeds take nearly 20 years to get back to the Premiership. So you can see, even with just one fall, just one relegation, you can see how long these things take. Oldham, of course, been outside the Premier League for 30 years. So, yeah, it's, a relegation can be so much worse than a promotion. But at the same time, as we've seen with Maidstone, a promotion can sometimes be a worse thing for you because if you're not fully prepared, all you're going to do is just end up back where you came from.
Yeah, we've spoken a little bit before we started recording about the National League North and South playoffs today happening, in which Oxford and Kidderminster both won their respective games. And of course, both teams really, especially Oxford, the first time in 120 odd years they've got to the National League. Never been that high before. One of the smaller budgets in the National League South. It's going to be a lot of pressure on them next season to perform. It's going to be a tough ask for them. But it's, again, looking at how they will fare in the National League, you have to kind of wonder how you've got teams of that size and stature and that financial ability going up, and teams of the likes of Scunthorpe, Yeovil, Maidstone, Torquay, all coming down. It's such an interesting situation they all find themselves in. And Nigel, looking at the relegation teams, obviously the four teams that have gone down will all believe they are bigger than where they will be next season. Obviously, Maidstone fans feel they're at least a National League club. Yeovil, Scunthorpe fans will probably feel like they're a Football League club. Torquay will obviously set their sights further than the National South too. Where do you think this relegation's going to put them next season? Do you expect these sides to bounce back, or do you think they're going to struggle more than perhaps their own fans would expect them to?
No, really, I don't think you can really tell at this stage of the season, can you? It's stage of pre-season. We don't know. I mean, Torquay have got quite a good retained list. They've retained quite a lot of players that they had before. Yeovil have just had a new takeover, it was announced over the weekend. So it's again sort of similar to the Maidstone situation. Their main shirt sponsor he's been in the background for a few months now, probably a few years. We've not really focused on him, have we? I've not been in the same league as him, but he's obviously been around the club for a while. Managed to get the deal over the line, so he's going to want to go and prove a point. And then you've got your traditional teams that's going to be up there that you would imagine, the likes of Dartford, Havant, Waterlooville, your regular sort of teams that are in and around that. So, it's going to be interesting. And as I say, I just think it's going to be a lot more spotlight on the league, and from a Maidstone point of view, I mean, we can only talk from our point of view. I think we'd be all right. I think we've talked about it before, haven't we? This is our where we feel comfortable. We know this league. We've had success on it at it before, not in the biggest of budgets each time we've sort of come up, but just by good recruitment and getting winning football, you get on that run and you just get the crowd through the door because we've said it before in previous podcasts. Fans are fickle, and quite rightly so. Everybody's purse is tightened at these times. So why would you go out and pay a team that's going to lose every game? Whereas if you've got a team that's winning every game, you might just have that spare cash that you want to go and watch that team, and you go and see them win, and you make the effort to go to the next game. So I think the crowds will go up, and providing we get our recruitment right, and it should be a competitive league.
Yeah, that's actually a good point in terms of attendances and stuff like that. If you've got the likes of Scunthorpe and Yeovil and Torquay, all these teams getting good attendances really for the performances they were putting in throughout the National League season last year, going down, they're going to be taking a lot more fans away than the likes of the teams dropping out would have done. Obviously, I think last season, before this one in the National League, when we were back in the South, I think we were taking away fans, more of them, to some games than there were home fans. And, that's going to support the other clubs in the league really, really well. And how that ends up translating across the league when these bigger clubs that we've already mentioned are coming down is obviously going to benefit that level of football. But you never know, that might make the level of competition harder for the likes of Maidstone, Torquay and Yeovil, Scunthorpe as well in their league. But that is enough about, I think, the season there. I think we've done a good little bit of coverage in terms of what's happened across the league. So it's time now to get into our predictions. So we're going to start off with relegation. I'll go first because, again, if you've never watched this podcast before, this is typically what happens. I'll go first. I'll make a bit of a fool of myself, and then the other two will just pick up the pieces and get a few things right where I falter. So starting things off, my 4 teams to go down, you'll notice Maidstone weren't included. Although often mistaken for, the first team I put in was Maidenhead. I then put Gateshead, Eastleigh and Scunthorpe in relegation. So Scunthorpe, of course, one of the teams that went down, 1 out of 4. I don't think that's horrendous. Completely missed the mark on Eastleigh. They ended up finishing in 9th. A really good season from them, which I don't think everybody was expecting. We saw Gateshead finishing mid-table in 14th, which again, I think they punched far above their weight in the league this season. They had a good couple wins at the end of the season to really carry them up from just on the cusp of relegation. If they hadn't have won those last 2 games, they would have finished 18th. So again, that just proves what we were saying earlier about how tight it was towards the end of the bottom there. And then Maidenhead finished 20th, surviving on the last day of the season. Torquay unfortunately couldn't catch them despite a good pickup of form towards the end of the season, and that is me missing out on those there. So like I say, 1 out of 4, I don't think that's too bad. Obviously the mess Scunthorpe were in at the start of the season, it wasn't maybe the hardest thing in the world to predict a double dip, but I think, Sean, you also had Scunthorpe in your relegation zone. I could be wrong.
Could be wrong. I wish I did do, Joe.
Someone else. I think Nigel must have done then. Someone definitely had Scunthorpe going down besides me. I'm sure of it. Yes, there he is at the bottom. Right, Sean, go on. Give us your relegation teams. Who did you send down at the start of the season?
Yeah, so I had Maidenhead, and they are perennial survival experts at this level. A good decade or so, I think they've been at this level now from memory. I know I had some stats on who'd been up at this level until recently, but yeah, they're one of the longer serving ones, probably. They're possibly close to 7 or 8 years, but still probably top third of length of time in this division, and they just, Devonshire there just keeps, getting them above that line. And it was, I know Nigel and I were on air for the last game of the season, and at one point it really did, as Louis van Gaal once said, twitchy arse. That it really did get to that stage, because I think they were 3-0 down, and Torquay were beating Wrexham.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a
close
possibility if Maidenhead had conceded another couple of goals and Torquay had held on or maybe snatched one at the end. So I think it was only 3 goals difference in the finish. That obviously would have been 2 if Torquay hadn't conceded and stayed on the same points as them. So Maidenhead doing their habitual Houdini act as usual. Small ground, minimal investment, right by the local paper. So obviously they can get the news out fairly quick. But again, just scraping by. Gateshead, obviously I enjoyed doing the away game there with Paul.
I'm sure.
Great fun.
Just for context, Maidstone shipped 4 goals when Gateshead were on an atrocious run, for those listening. So, not a great away day.
No, but I mean, with Gateshead, their run at the end, they had 6 wins in a row around their FA Trophy run. They finished off 3rd in the form table in the last 10 games of the season, and they clearly were in a position similar to us after about 35 games. They were outside of the drop zone with a game in hand and about 3 points clear of Yeovil. Again, sort of disproving my theory a little bit, because they did have the game in hand. It did come in handy, and they did stay above Yeovil that whole entire time. That was it was about 8 or 9 games to go at that stage. And then, my next one on my list was Wealdstone. I've got to get that right. And looking at them in their league table, I mean, again, they, with Brown before he left, he banged in quite a few goals for them, and he and a few other players. When I did that game with Callum a couple of months back, they were impressive, nippy little side, a lot of pace in behind. And they were very much the archetypal mid-table side, because I think they're about 11 from the playoffs and 12 from the drop, looking at the table. So they very much, I mean, they'd probably say they've overachieved a little bit as well, from a lot of the people we met on the day or on the evening of that game when we got there. And another habitual survivor, very much like Maidenhead, as we've mentioned on previous editions, Aldershot as well. Very much scraping around, getting by. There was a scenario probably 2 games before the end of the season where they were in with a realistic chance of getting relegated. In the end, Widrington come in, just about managed to keep them up. It's going to be interesting to see how he rebuilds them next season, and see how many more ex-Maidstone players end up there.
So please no more.
Indeed.
Stop taking them.
So yes, I got a big fat 0 with Maidenhead, Maidstone, Gateshead, Wealdstone, and Aldershot. So unfortunately, I did poop deck out of that one. Unfortunately, but I did a bit better elsewhere. But we'll get to Nige first.
Yeah, 1 out of 8 is not a lot to shout about from the both of us. So Nigel, is there any way you can up the numbers?
Well, yeah, exactly. Like the other two, you two, I did go for Maidenhead and Gateshead, and we've talked about those and the reasons why we picked those. Maidenhead did just survive again against the relegation by goal difference, and I think we said it on air, didn't we? They just seem to find a way. I mean, the record against the teams in and around them is not that great. I mean, of course, we did get a home win against them at the Gallagher, which was our last win in the National League. Just get that one in there. But yeah.
How long ago was that, Nigel?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, even when we played them towards the end of the season, we've talked a few of my mates, and we were talking to Will de Havilland after the game, and we said, "Oh, you're safe now," and he said, "Well, I think we just need one or two more points to be sure of it," and that was the case because they didn't pick up another point until after they beat us. So our last win in the National League was against Maidenhead, and Maidenhead's last win in the National League was against Maidstone. So there's a bit of symmetry there, but
back up
Yeah.
your point there,
Confused.
Nigel.
Sorry?
Sorry to interrupt, Nigel, but to back up your point, looking at the form table for the last 10 games, Maidenhead finished 20th in the form table as well in the last 10 games. They literally had one win in their last 10 league games.
against us.
They barely. What's that against? It was a 2-1. Yeah, it would have been the 2-1 win. Sorry, yes,
Yeah.
it would have been. Yes, yeah, the booty drag back, free kick, etc. Yes, it was indeed Made versus Made. Yes. So yes, just to back up your point there, that's why they finished 20th, and their form and
But
everything.
that's been the story of their previous seasons. They don't do well against the teams, but they're like the bogey side of the better teams in the league. Let's say the teams that are pushing in and around the playoffs. They just find a way to just keep that points tally ticking over, and they just do enough. So yeah, as we spoke about Gateshead, we all had them, especially with them at the beginning of the season losing Langstaff and Scott. We thought they would struggle, but they seem to have found a way and got a few players in to, and about Christmas time just to keep their head just above that water. And then they've now sort of kicked on. They've made the FA Trophy final next week as well. So that like what we were saying, so that little bit of momentum, you're winning games. It takes care of itself, doesn't it? You just start picking up those points in the league. It's keeping that winning momentum going, and they've pulled up to around mid-table. So the other two that I had was, as Joe, I had Scunthorpe. Again, a relegated side coming down. They didn't really have a settled squad. They released a lot of their players when they did get relegated, so we couldn't really see, of what they picked up, whether it was going to be enough to keep them above the line, and so it proved. And I had Yeovil as well. So that makes 2 out of the 4.
Not bad. At least we've got a podium rather than just like everybody getting the same. So sure, you've come last on that one, but don't worry, you'll make it up. But again, a little bit later on.
with Yeovil, I thought it's they got a manager in. Chris Hargreaves had come in as manager. Didn't really have the experience. Couldn't really see what they'd signed at the beginning of the season. Anything of quality that they were gonna. They didn't really have any strikers. I know they had Josh Staunton in there, who's been their team, and they had a good goalie in Grant Smith, who by all accounts did perform admirably. But they had the most draws of any team in the league, and they all it needed for them was to turn a few of those draws into wins, not concede last minute equalisers when they were in front, and they would have been all right, but they didn't. And again, as I just mentioned, they had problems with their ownership. They never really had a settled ownership. They didn't really know where the finances were coming. They didn't have a leader. They was a bit rudderless at times, and ultimately paid the price.
Well, I think adding another 2 to the 12 isn't terrible. 3 out of 12 from the 3 of us is, I suppose, not a brilliant effort, but it could have gone worse, I suppose. But we did a little bit better in other areas. So let's take a little look now at our playoff predictions. Of course, as we were just speaking about before, playoff final did end up with a Notts County versus Chesterfield game. Notts County ended up winning on penalties, 2 saves, 1 fantastic one from Archie Mayer, winning it for the Magpies in that one. An arm and a leg needed to keep that one out, but very well he did indeed. So let's start off with my playoff predictions. So I had Wrexham, Chesterfield, Notts County, Southend, Bromley, Solihull and Halifax. So 3 out of 7. I don't want to take any credit for those 3 either, because that was very obvious that they were going to finish in those playoff spots, that top 7 of the league, of course. And I mean, like I said at the start of the season, I thought Halifax were going to do pretty well just because they'd signed some decent players seemingly at the back. They'd always been a pretty astute team when it comes to that defensive area. I thought potentially they might be able to pick up a few more goals than we've seen from them in the past, but in the end, they ended up finishing 11th. They only conceded 49 goals, which was one of the lowest in the league, so I was somewhat right, but they only managed to score 49 goals. So, 48 they conceded, 49 they scored. So, yeah, not a great one on that one. 11th they finished. Bromley, I did actually get that one right. They just got in right on the end of the season, just pipping Southend, the other team I had in there, to the playoff spots, finishing 7th. They did pretty well, to be fair, throughout the season. Obviously, Maidstone hated playing them this year. 2 really bad games for really different reasons against Bromley for us this season. And happy they got in terms of predictions, not because of rivalry or anything. Southend, like I said, just missed out to Bromley right at the end. And Solihull, a really strong start to the season from Solihull. We're in the playoffs for a good portion of the season and then just fell right off a cliff. And I'm going to go to Sean in a second because I know he's got a form table available that I do not. But Sean, what was Solihull's form table like the last 10 of the season? Because I'm guessing it was pretty abysmal.
It was, and I was surprised at that as well, Joe, when I looked that up, because that was one of the first ones I looked for. Because obviously, myself and Nige went to that game, commentated start of March, and they had a really good home run. You know, they beat Scunthorpe, they beat Borehamwood, and then they drew 4 and lost 4 in their last 8. They didn't get a win in their last 8 games, and you consider how close they were at one point, and you can see, you know, they dropped off. They were closer to the drop by 10 points than they were to the top 7, 13 points. And for me, they're one of the ones, I think all 3 of us put them in the playoffs, and, you know, a couple of predictions that have made alongside that between us would echo the reasons why. But for my money, obviously it's that loss of form, but it's around the same time we lost Barham. Dallas left Solihull, and he ended up going to Chesterfield. And you could see from yesterday's playoff game the way they played through with Dallas, Chesterfield, and certainly when Nigel and I did the last regular league game of the season, you could see the attacking potential that they had, Chesterfield, by adding Dallas in there and the runs through the middle and the hold-up play that he had. It was a real big loss. They did have a few players like Sabara and Kelly that were able to fill a little bit of the gap. I believe Kelly was the one that came from Maidenhead from memory, and I think that was one of the reasons we also, all of us, said that Maidenhead were going to go down. So again, to go back to that part of the table quickly, so many teams lose players. How were they able to replace them? And again, they're just about, you know, well, I think it was Orsi got the bulk of the goals from Maidenhead this season to keep them up. So yeah, Solihull dip in form. That March transfer window really did eat out quite a few sides' potential to stay anywhere near the playoffs. And Dallas's departure was very much a who shot JR moment for them. And did the last third of the season really happen or not? Spoiler for any Dallas fans who've not caught up from about 35 years ago.
I haven't seen it, but I'll take your word for some imminent spoilers in there. Maybe one day I'll recall this conversation and look back on it very, very negatively with your little hints there. Exactly. But yeah, so again, not a terrible set of playoff predictions, I don't think. I think, like Sean said, pretty much everybody would have had Solihull up there. Got Bromley right, Southend just missing out, and Halifax, unfortunately for them, dropping off a little bit too much to get near the playoffs. So, Sean, who were your 7 teams?
So I had York City that seemed, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I went as well. I mean, to explain the whole York City thing, it was just they chopped and changed managers more than Chelsea and Leeds this season, frankly. That was the main thing, because, you know, that away game, Hack's last game, they looked like a team possessed. They looked like they were going places. We've had a few occasions this season, Maidstone United, where we've played sides. Gateshead were absolutely awful form. They played us and absolutely battered us. Us and York, both completely out of form this season when we went head to head. Remember the infamous stat that Dan and I gave on air? We'd never lost a league game to York City in our history, and we put that one right for the Minster men, the Railway men, whichever set of men. It could have been any gender, frankly, that would have beaten us or any species that afternoon. But yeah, York had 4 managers this season. They were my tip for 7th. Lord knows how I came to that. I think it was the double promotion bounce thing, I think, is what I had in the back of my head.
The lovely kits, that's what it was.
Yes, yeah, that was clearly the sell. Yes, love that. Solihull I had in 6th. Too many games in hand in the end. Lots of matches to catch up on. Unable to because the squad wasn't big enough. I mentioned Dallas as well being a big miss for them. I had Oldham in 5th. I thought they'd be a bit more resolute than they were. But considering how far down the table they were, after 30 games, they were on 31 points after 28 games, and they were only 3 points above the drop zone. And you consider that they ended up on 61 points in the end. They managed to get 30 points from their last 18 games, which I've got to say, I don't know many teams this season that have had runs as good as that outside of the top 7. So certainly going into next season, the investment they've had, the stewardship of David Unsworth, who once he gets on a run with the side, he can do very well. They had a goal difference of -1 in the end, which outside of the top 8 is, pretty much as good as it gets. So points wise, they were 10 off the playoffs in the finish. Most of their stats pointed to them easily being a top 8-9 side. So yes, that is me trying to claw back a bit of credibility, but at the same time going, clearly if they got their finger out their arse by about game rather than about game 33, they probably would have done a Southend and been very close to the playoffs. My 4th place was Southend, as we thought that they would, be able to get through their money worries and be able to kick on. They couldn't quite match Bromley because it was pretty much that sort of mid-March time where a lot of sides were looking at Eastleigh and Boreham Wood and saying, well, we need to be able to win pretty much every one of our last 10 matches to get there. And then somehow they did. Bromley, I must mention, who weren't one of my picks, but from the end of March when they played Maidstone, and myself, Fred, and Jesus H. Christ were on the airwaves. Bromley, from that, including that game and the game before, they won in their last 10 matches. We were the 9th match, or the second match of that last 10, I should say. They won 6 and drew 4. They were unbeaten in their last 10 matches, and they were 5th in that league table. And to comment on your tip for Eastleigh for relegation earlier, who were one of the sides who just missed out on the playoffs, they managed to only win 2 of their last 10 come the end of the season, and that's the reason they dropped out in the finish, did Eastleigh. They really did completely and utterly balls that one up at the end of the season. So yeah, Southend weren't able to make up the ground like Bromley did in place of Eastleigh. I had Chesterfield in 3rd, which I do believe is exactly where they finished, so I'll take that. I had Wrexham in 2nd, which isn't technically correct, but they did still go up. And I had Notts County in 1st, which technically is incorrect, but they did also go up. So I will clutch at those straws. I don't know how we're scoring things. I don't think we're stating what happened and what we said. And yeah, so I like to think that I got the top 3 as close as any of us did, frankly. And yeah, I'm fairly happy with that, and able statistically, in a sense, to justify some of those picks.
Well, I think that's a slight improvement on mine, and going on improvements, Nigel. I know you've definitely got your outside pick was a fantastic call, and I know you're going to cling to that in this little outlay of your playoff predictions. So hit us with it, because there's definitely an outlier there, but you called it.
Yeah, I did have Woking in there. Um, I just thought that I was talking about Yeovil, having appointed Hargreaves as their manager. The flip side of that was, of course, that Darren Sarll went to Woking. He took take a few players with him. He did pick up a few as the season went on. As we said, they just had a new investment towards the end of the previous season. They just had that solid base, I thought, at the time, and the additions that they'd made, I just thought they would make that push. I have to say, having commentated on both the games against them, I wasn't overly impressed with them, but they just did manage to get the results done. I mean, it took a last-minute winner against our well, really two. They was behind in that game, wasn't they? I think we scored in about the 74th, 75th minute, and then they scored for a mound coming on at the end. They had the two bearded baldies at the back, which was a bit of a nightmare to commentate on because they both look like the same from the side when where we was commentating
Big old
from.
Cuthbert.
But they got the job done, and that was ultimately what got them in there. Just that side that got the job done and kept the points ticking over. Dagenham, I had in 6th place. They were the flip side of Woking, really, weren't they? They consistently inconsistent. They'd have periods where they'd put a few good results in. They did go to Notts County, and they're the only team that beat Notts County at their home ground, weren't they? At last minute in the offie on strike, that I think if it hadn't hit the net, it would still be travelling to the moon now. But they got the job done, and then ultimately as well, they lost silly points. They dropped points at the wrong time that just sort of stopped them building any momentum to get into the playoff place. I don't think throughout the season they was ever in the playoff places. They was always on the fringes of it, and you always thought, if they get a run together, they can get in there. But they lost McCallum halfway through the season, or just after Christmas time. And then they did get Iniefiong in just after he'd got his hat trick for all the shot at our ground. But yeah, they haven't really got any consistency going. But the other team I had in there was Boreham Wood, another team that neither of us had put in there. But I just thought, they're just a very workmanlike team, aren't they? They don't go and bash teams for 4 and 4. Well, they did us, but
the one team all season.
Yeah, we'll gloss over that one, but they're very much tight at the back, aren't they? They know their game plan, they know what they're about. Even in the playoffs, they stick to their game plan. They beat Barney in that same way by just grinding out results, getting their noses in front. They know how to close the game out, and it's no surprise, they've had good cup runs in the last few years. It's that sort of one game at a time, and just sticking to the formula, sticking to that set plan, and it proved enough to get them into the playoffs. And they actually did win a game in the playoffs. As I said, they beat Barnet, but they just fell short against Notts County, despite beating 2-0 at half time. But Solihull, I had them in there as well. Same as reasons as everybody else has said. I thought they would just kick on from last year, losing in the playoff final. Didn't really happen for them. I mean, they came down to Gallagher in October time, didn't they? On a Tuesday night, and it was a 0-0 draw. Can't really think, one of those bore draw 0-0s, wasn't it? Neither team looked like scoring. I have to say, I said it in the commentary at Chesterfield, but up until when Dallas scored against us in that last game, I did actually mention it he'd never actually scored against us. And he's one of those players that he comes with such a reputation, but he's not the tallest of players. It's his movement and it's his thinking that gets him into those positions, just being in the right place at the right time. But he's not a physical type of player. He's not somebody that's going to win his headers and just outrun players. He's just got that speed of thought. I think that gets him there. But yeah, I suppose he didn't really. And he's another one of these as well that like clutch goals. You know, if he scores one, you score 2 or 3. You know, and you go for like a 6-week spell where he's always scoring. Then you go for another 6 weeks where he doesn't really score goals. And but yeah, he was all right for Chesterfield in the end, and he nearly got him over the line, but didn't in the end. And then the top 3 again, same as everybody else, just not necessarily in the right order, as Eric Morecambe once said. Notts County, Wrexham, and I did have Chesterfield, and they just fell short, didn't they? Obviously, beating Notts County on penalties isn't for everyone, is it?
Yeah, I think that's one of our claims to fame, or probably our only claim to fame this season, really. But yeah, some really good insight there into the teams that you opted for your picks there, Nigel. I mean, Dagenham, you mentioned, obviously very much a team that dropped City points this season. They only lost 1 game less than Yeovil in the league this season. Dropped a lot of City points. They could have been picking up draws. Only drew 9 games this season. So yeah, a lot of points dropped there, which could have really carried them up into those playoff spots. Sean.
To also mention Nigel's point, they had 3 match days in the playoff spots the entire season. So it's a side that consistently, usually there for a lot longer. But yeah, this season they really did flub their lines with their Tim Howard American investment. You would have thought they would have done better. I know they got the better of us twice in the space of a week, 1-0. But yeah, only the 3 match days in total in the playoffs, and probably roughly around the same time they were beating us, to be fair. So it was our fault they got there and their own fault that they dropped out, probably.
Yeah. And looking at the other teams in the playoffs as well that you put in there, Nigel. I mean, Boreham Wood, you mentioned that they're a 1 game at a time team. Their manager said in that game against Notts County that they do so well in these cup games and playoffs and things like that. They're very much used to ticking games over, ticking results over. And like you say, they never really blew teams away this season. Only scored 52 goals in the league, which was the lowest in the top 10 by 5 goals or 4 goals. So again, like you say, not really blowing teams away, but the most defensively sound team in the league by some distance, with 40 goals conceded. And considering where they ended up finishing compared to the teams at the top, to concede less goals than Wrexham and Notts County, who just blew teams away, is really, really impressive. And then Woking, obviously, somebody mentioned Reece Brown playing for Wealdstone earlier on and moving, Sean, and he ended up as the 4th highest scorer in the league with 20 goals. So again, these things worked out in your favour very much so, Nigel. So you definitely won that one. And yeah, I mean, looking at the predictions as a whole, I think especially in the playoffs, they went a lot better than the relegation. I think we can all say we did a pretty good job on those ones. And it's now time to take a little look at individuals, some individual awards, top scorer and player of the year, or what we also predicted at the start of the season. I predicted Kabongo Shamanga to be the top scorer in the league, and that didn't go very well. He ended up playing 8 games all season, I think, something around that. Not a great deal, and yeah, that's unfortunate for him. He didn't. Oh no, he played 17 games. Sorry, in the National League. The internet has done me dirty there, but 7 goals, 17 games. Only started 20% of the games for Chesterfield in the time that he was there. Played 33% of the minutes in the time that he was there. Obviously had a lot of injury problems. I mean, Maidstone fans won't forget him because he won them the game against us at home in this season. But yeah, I think going off the back of last year, it was obviously something we've mentioned at the start of the season. His goal scoring ability, his goal to game ratio was sensational. And we thought that would spearhead really Chesterfield in their title hopes. But his injuries and stuff like that did not obviously do very well for him. And then my player of the year, I predicted Paul Mullin. Paul Mullin, of course, with the title winners Wrexham, arguably their best player this season, did end up as the second highest goal scorer in the league with 38 goals. But he was pipped. He was pipped by Macaulay Langstaff of Notts County, who scored 42 open play goals, which certainly got to be some sort of record. I mean, obviously he's broken the National League scoring record on its own, and that's without any penalties involved. So props to him. He got player of the year. Top scorer, of course, also him. But Sean, how far off are you in your predictions?
For my two picks, Ollie Palmer, clearly the lesser of the two statistically for Wrexham, although he did score 14% of their league goals this season, and considering how many they scored, that's quite a high number. Good. It was his best season in a decade when he got 25 for Havant Waterlooville. So it was his best season since then. Played most of the games, had a lot of bench appearances, but a great foil when needed when they played together, and also another dimension when Mullin wasn't getting awarded enough penalties to get himself near Langstaff, as many people might say. My player of the year, I know one that while we were all watching the playoff final yesterday, one that one of us might have mentioned and said they wouldn't be too keen on him, and I instantly said I'm sure he'll have a role to play, and he had a couple, and I was very pleased with that. It was a chap called Ruben Rodriguez. He played 45 of the 48 games this season in the league and the playoffs. He got one goal less than his previous seasons. We got 20 last season and 19 this in the league. 16 assists as well, which meant he got two more.
Yeah,
exactly. So he got two more than Greg Ollie did at Gateshead. One of the reasons why Gateshead were in such good form, because I think the bulk of those were in the second half of the season for Ollie, although the first half of them were probably all four against us. So yeah, he got two more than Ollie. He was the joint sixth top scorer in the division overall, because clearly he'd taken all the penalties that Langstaff didn't want to have, or else he would have been on about 50 probably. The top midfield goal scorer as well in the National League this season. Everybody else above him is a striker, so the top scorer midfielder. Only 4 players played more games and minutes for Notts County this season. The likes of Cameron, Chickson, Palmer and Langstaff. 16% of Notts County's goals this season, and he was one behind Paul Mullin for penalties as well. So those are the numbers, and yet again my statistical justification for why I picked the promoted Ruben Rodriguez as my player of the year. Fully justified, I say.
Yeah, 100% justified. I mean, I had no idea his assists were that high either, to be fair. That is a shit ton of goal involvements that you don't see, really. I mean, I know at the start of the season, I distinctly remember you saying he will be up there with the top contenders in the league for goals and assists, and he was very, very much so. He did have a shit playoffs. I will take that. But yes, you were right by saying he will crop up and pull something out his arse in the end, in which he did, and inevitably took it to penalties and did get Notts a result in the end. So, Nigel, of course, Sean's come a little bit closer to the mark than myself. What about you? How did you fare in your individual player predictions?
So top scorer, I had Josh Kelly. I think when we recorded the podcast, he just completed his move from Maidenhead to Solihull.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, having predicted Solihull to get in the playoffs, that he would be that little bit of extra that would get them not over the line necessarily, but give him a bit more consistency. He was quite consistent at Maidenhead. And with players like Joe Sabara and, Dallas there as well, feeding him, I thought he was going to have a good season. But as we've mentioned, Solihull had that big drop off, and it kind of affected all of the players in the team really. And none of them really shone as much as they did last year. And my player of the year, I had Elliot Lee in, dropping down from League One around about the time we recorded the podcast. I don't know his stats. I mean, I don't know if Sean can get his stats up for these
Got
assists.
12 goals.
Yeah, so in a team that scores as much as they do, when you've got Mullin up there as well, backing a lot of goals, it's not a bad sort of return. I know he did start a few games from the bench. And I think he did have an injury layoff. I don't think he featured in the game against us at the Gallagher. I think he was possibly injured around that time. So, but they've just got such a pool of talent, haven't they, that they can, some of the players that they had on their benches in games just, would walk into any other side in the league, but probably apart from Notts County. But you'd certainly go on, Sean.
Apologies, Nigel. The stats, the scores on the board you were looking for. He scored one more than Josh Kelly did this season.
Yeah,
nice to see that your player of the season outscored your top scorer. That's just the way these things go when you put them together. In terms of total goal involvements, obviously I've already mentioned, because I will again, Ruben Rodriguez with the assists with the 16. Elliot Lee got 9 assists, so 21 total goal involvements is very commendable in a Wrexham side. When you consider that, I mean, you've got to admit, statistically, it's 48 goal involvements for Paul Mullin, because even he got 10 assists on top of his 406 penalties he scored this season as well. So he's done
405, one dubiously, I'm sure.
Indeed, of course. Oh, everyone's got one dubious for Mr. Mullin, who I must admit, that was probably the one downside of the coverage yesterday. I think, why on earth would you get Paul Mullin to come in and take the pick out of these two sides?
So weird.
I've been fine for 3 weeks. What you fuckers been doing?
Yeah, I've been partying in Vegas for a couple of weeks.
Found that weird. Other than that, BT, kudos, Matt Smith, good personal friend, waved me off after Chesterfield because he knows the guy in the suit. I saved him from drowning on New Year's when he come down. So, good buddies, me and him. But yes, Elliot Lee, 21 goal involvements, just outside the top 10. An exemplary season, as you say, him dropping down, Nigel, but he took to it very well. But I'm obviously always biased towards a footballer with Lee for their surname from that brilliant family. Of course, I would be biased.
Yeah, so like we said though, that they've got such a rare talent, within their squad that you could really. I mean, Dolby, come on, he was a sort of a bit part player, went from Southend, but towards the end of the season, at times he was the main foil for Mullin, in that team. So you can go for the whole team, can't you? You both them and Notts County just had players that were far above the level, and I'm sure if they do retain some of those players, they're going to thrive next year up in League Two. And I wouldn't be surprised if both Notts County and Wrexham go back to back and find themselves come this time next year in League One. So, like we said before, it's just shining that light onto the National League, isn't it? When you've got the players of that caliber in your squad, and let's not forget as well, Wrexham did have that run in the FA Cup. Got to the 5th round, didn't they, and lost to Sheffield United again. It's highlighting the overall profile of the league, and there you go.
Well, that's it. That's our predictions wrapped up. I think everyone's done pretty well in certain areas. Other people, including myself, have faltered quite poorly in other areas. I think it's fair to say overall, Nigel, especially in terms of the teams, you're probably the winner on this one. I think the most relegation teams predicted, although still only half. The promotion teams did really well at that as well. Obviously including one more than myself, I do believe. And of course, that outside shout of Woking was very commendable indeed. And Sean, I think it's fair to say you won the individual player ones in terms of closest. I think people would debate Mullin and Rodriguez as player of the year. Langstaff, obviously, for the records he's broken and the lack of non-dubious penalties, or dubious penalties, sorry, that Mullin got. Obviously, Langstaff, fantastic season from him, so very well deserved in the end. I think in terms of what we've got to say, there's not a lot more. We've wrapped up, obviously, our predictions from last year. We'll be doing it all over again, this time for the National League South. Of course, we are Maidstone fans first and foremost, so we will cover where we are. Unfortunately for us, that is one league down back in the 6th division of English football. But I'm sure, as we've said already in this podcast, a few massive teams joining us down there for next season. So it's going to be an enjoyable ride. I'm looking forward to it. I know that you two guys are both looking forward to it as well. Nigel, I know you're very hopeful. Sean, I know you're hopeful as well. Maybe not in the same sense as Nigel, but I think we're going to have a good season next season, and hopefully everybody is going to stay with us for that ride. So just want to say thank you both, Sean and Nigel. Obviously, it's the first year that I've done this here on the channel, and both of you have been here the entire journey as well. So thank you both so much for joining me along this short but not so sweet year in football terms, but very long and prosperous here on the channel.
Welcome.
And we're looking forward to being at Wembley this time next week, of course.
Indeed, we've got our tickets.
Come and find us.
Yeah, we'll be there. You know, my 171 subscribers, if you recognise us, do say hello. But no,
they'll all be there. They'll all be there.
Yeah, all of them will be there. But yeah, I mean, we're going to be at the FA Trophy final next week. This is being recorded on the Sunday.
And Vars.
And the Vars. Don't forget the Vars. I can't even remember who's playing in that, but Sean, I'm sure you know, isn't it like Ascot?
And then Bedlington.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly what I said. So, yeah, I might make a video on the Vars and Trophy final, little road to Wembley. We'll see. I probably won't, but I've said it now, so I might have to. But yeah, like I said, thank you so much, both of you, for joining me. It's been a real pleasure doing this with you on the channel this year, and hopefully we have many more memories to come next season. That hopefully makes our stuff on the channel a little bit more enjoyable, because we've had a lot of downbeat times this season here on the channel with not a lot to talk about following Maidstone. So like I say, looking for something a little more prosperous next season, but I enjoy it no matter what happens. So now it's time to wrap it up. Thank you everybody for watching. It's been a pleasure to have you with us for the whole season. If you do enjoy this content, do leave a like down below, do subscribe to the channel, and as Sean's pointing, it's all down there. Leave your comments down below as well. Did you get anything right in your pre-season predictions? And hopefully you may have done a little bit better than some of us. So thank you all so very much for watching, and we'll see you next season.